I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
Well, we ended up last week looking at, where will I find my question here? Looking at the differences of Paul's circumstances between 1st and 2nd Timothy. And now we've moved on to our section of dates. And of course our 30 AD timeline we know as the cross when Christ was crucified. And from 400 BC till the time of Christ's crucifixion, we have in that period the completion of the Old Testament, of the law, and we have the beginning of the gospel era. And then our next date always is 70 AD, with the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome, 70 years after Christ was crucified. And then we move to Paul's first Roman imprisonment.
You say 70 years after Christ crucified? 40.
The which?
40 years. 40 years after Christ crucified.
Sorry, 40. That's right, good.
Sorry.
You guys in your math are a lot quicker than my math. Mine ended at grade 6, I think. In Acts 28, verses 16, we read there, "And when we entered into Rome, Paul was suffered to abide by himself with the soldier that guarded him." At this point, Paul now is under his house arrest, and he wrote his first letter to Timothy at some point, we think, between 62 and 66 AD. And now in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 9, chapter 2 and verse 9, we read here, Paul says, "Wherein I suffer hardships unto bonds as a malefactor, but the word of God is not bound." Paul here now is in Roman custody again, and this is his second imprisonment. He's already had his initial hearing before Caesar, and he's awaiting trial again. And if you look over at chapter 4 in 2 Timothy and verse 16, Paul says there, "At my first defense, no one took my part, but all forsook me. May it not be laid to their account." We're presuming by that passage that he is now under his second imprisonment. And we believe that he believes that he will be found guilty and be executed soon. If you look back at verse 6, he says, "For I am already being offered, and the time of my departure is come." So Paul is presuming that this is nearing the end of his life. And according to secular history, according to church tradition, Paul was executed shortly before Nero committed suicide in June of, where did I have that? In June or July 19th AD, Paul, this is when Nero committed suicide, and in Irving Jensen's survey of the New Testament, he says that around the time of Paul's first release was the burning of Rome, and it was dated July 19th. And secular history said that this kind of led indirectly to Paul's second imprisonment. The theory being that Nero couldn't squelch the well-founded suspicion that he had ordered the fires. And so one way to take the pressure off of his back was he blamed the Christians. And he ordered them at this time to be arrested and punished. Whether or not that had anything to do with Paul's second imprisonment, we don't know. What we do know, though, is that anyone that stood for the gospel, anyone that preached the gospel at that time was under persecution anyway. Whether Nero's actions helped promote that, we don't know, but it's possible. And so we move on then through our timeline, and we come to the purpose of 2 Timothy, and we begin with our historical question, with our section, When death nears us, our priorities change. Okay, it doesn't matter who we are, as death approaches. And what used to seem significant to us is set aside as one considers his ultimate fate. And this is why we listen to a person's last words so carefully. I'm sure there's many of us here this morning that have had loved ones that have passed on and heard last words. But when the loved one is a Christian, we want to know what gives that person their hope in the face of death, don't we? It encourages us, and it makes a bond deeper between us and the person that's passing on. And 2 Timothy is Paul's last words, okay? From a cold, dark Roman prison. The aged apostle here now is writing his final instructions to Timothy, his son in the faith, as he called him. And Paul knew that this letter might well be his final contact with Timothy. With his execution drawing closer, he implores Timothy to come to him quickly now. Come to my side. But in case Timothy couldn't make it, Paul imparts his last words of encouragement to his son in the faith. And as I said last week, I think really this is an overview of all our books, but really this letter should be read all at once, from beginning to end, to grasp and understand the faith that Paul had. It's an amazing words of his strength of character. And our question then is, why would Timothy need encouragement concerning his responsibility to continue to preach the word and fulfill his ministry? So our reading is taken from 2 Timothy chapter 4, and it's the first 8 verses. So 2 Timothy chapter 4, and we'll take a couple verses each, we'll do, and we'll read the first 8 verses, and we'll start. Gord, I'll get you to begin, please.
I charge you therefore by God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and teaching.
For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in according to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth, and will turn aside to myths.
That you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand.
I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing.
Okay. From that passage, and hearing what Paul is saying of himself, why do you think Timothy would need encouragement concerning his duties now as an evangelist? What does Paul say that if you were Timothy, what would you take from that passage?
As
Go
you
ahead.
said earlier, this is Paul's final message. He knew that his time is at hand. So he wanted to impart his last set of instructions or encouragement to Timothy.
Right. Do you think he thinks that maybe Timothy is going to go through the same experiences? Jeff?
I'd say there's a couple of things. First of all, the beginning in verse 7 of chapter 1 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of sound mind." So it's easy to say not to be afraid, but Paul's showing by example that he's not afraid of things that are happening because of his faith in Christ. We may feel fear, but it doesn't prevent us from doing the things that are right.
Right.
And plus also, in verse 3 of chapter 4, Paul tells Timothy he's going to face difficulties, even among Christians. You may reach a point where they don't want to hear anymore. Again, he needs to be encouraged to stand fast in Christ, whatever he faces, whether fears or false teaching or brethren faithful, continue to be
Right.
steadfast.
Right, exactly. But Timothy would maybe take from Paul's words here that, yeah, I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be persecuted. Paul is an apostle, as a teacher of the Gentiles. He suffered persecution. And he's being honest with Timothy, isn't he? That, yeah, you're going to suffer. So if you want to be an evangelist for the Lord's church, then you need to be prepared. And then he reminds them, as you said, to teach the doctrine and conduct. Your conduct must always be Christ-like, even if you're facing persecution. You can't give up. And false teaching and apostasy are inevitable. Like, these are things that, and we'll maybe talk about it a little deeper later on, but an evangelist needs to realize this is going to happen. I'm sure Jeremy would vouch for that too, and each of us. If you desire to be holy and righteous, it's not going to be a walk like in the rose bed, as they say.
Good. Well, today's sermon is going to be one of those ones that probably the world would scoff at. And you put it up online, and people are going to mock you and ridicule you, and that can lead to people maybe, oh well, maybe I'll pull back a little bit, or
Right.
maybe I won't be as hard on things. Like, as far as people here will have probably no problem with the lesson. But online, every time I preach on evolution and creation, it's you're a fool.
Yeah.
And so you got to be able to take what the world is throwing at you and not become discouraged.
Right, right. And a lot of it just has to, what's the old saying?
Roll off your back.
Water on a duck's back. Sorry, so be it. But it was interesting too. It struck me that no matter how strong we are and willing to endure hardships, persecution, Paul's desire that he was wanting Timothy to come to him in prison. He wanted him to try and make it before his timely death was coming on. He desired the companionship of Timothy. And that kind of struck me that, no matter how strong we think we are, it shows me that we need each other. There is a need there. And especially here with Paul facing death, there's nothing wrong with seeking companionship, seeking encouragement. That's not a sin. And it's certainly not to say, who could say Paul is weak in his faith by doing that? Carla?
Well, yeah, he needs to know everything, not just the good side. You hear people saying, oh, if you become a Christian, everything will be all right. Everything is not going to be all right when you become a Christian. And those who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. So Timothy needed to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, everything. Everything that needs to be told, and Paul didn't hold back. And he probably felt so much for this young man. And you can tell from here, like, he was really, like, to me, and his heart was heavy, and so on, because it's so touching and so moving.
Yes.
All his last words to him.
Yeah.
You just want him to prosper, to do well. And you're going to face this, but keep the faith.
Exactly. Yeah, well, we could think of that ourselves when we first became Christians. If we were young, or even if we're older, we're full of zeal, we're ready to go, and then all of a sudden the problems arise. And I'm not sure if it was Jeremy that mentioned it some time ago. I've heard it said that, when someone comes forward to be baptized or speaking in a study, that person needs to know, are you ready to give up worldly desires? Are you ready to take on persecution, discouragement? Because if we're not, then we lose our faith pretty quick. Jeff?
I think the important thing is growth. It's learning that the good outweighs the bad.
Right.
Which is what obviously Paul wants to understand. So he says there's a crown of righteousness for him.
Yes.
At the end, the good far outweighs the bad. The bad is only temporary for a time, but the good is eternal.
Exactly. Well, it was Paul that said he desired to be with Christ. That was stronger desire, but he knew the good that people needed through his teachings. Do you ever? No. So then, this just picture, one of Dave's maps, just to kind of impress on us the loneliness that Paul would have been feeling. There was quite a bond between him and Timothy, and now Paul's in Rome in prison, and Timothy, we believe, is in Ephesus when he writes this letter to him. But distance can add to our emotions of feeling down. needing that companionship. It's not like Timothy's around the corner. So it just kind of gives us an idea of the separation that Paul was feeling with Timothy. So our next question then, under doctrinal section, is what characteristics are necessary in order for one to be an effective servant of Christ, and why? I appreciated Jeff's prayer before class. Made me think, yes, we're speaking a lot here of the duties of an evangelist, of Jeremy's job as an evangelist, but an evangelist is just a servant of Christ. And are we not all servants of Christ? Our respective roles. So thinking of that, I thought, we are vessels of honor, aren't we? We're told that. And so we'll see something in this passage, instead of me giving it away to you, but we'll go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, and we'll read from 22 to 26, and we could take 2 verses each. We ended with Jeff, didn't we? At least, do you want to begin 2 verses each, and then we'll go to Victoria and
servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to take patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponent with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to the knowledge of the truth.
Yuri, have you got?
And that they may come to their senses and escape the share of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will.
And Veronica, can you finish off to 28?
Well, that's
Or
it.
26? Is
That was it. That was 26.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't turn the fan off, so.
That's fine.
Somebody wave a hand, please. Being vessels of honor, what do we see there that we must do? There's some key words.
Flee youthful lusts.
Okay, flee, right? And what comes after that? It depends what version you just have, I guess. Flee was the first thing. Then pursue was one that I found.
Avoid.
And avoid.
Avoid.
Yeah. As servants of Christ, that is what we have to do. There's things we have to flee from. Okay? And then there's things that we have to pursue and avoid. I think the difference I found between fleeing and avoiding is some things aren't as hard on us, we just avoid it. But then there may be things in our lives, past sins, past habits, that rear their ugly head. Picture yourself running. You've got to run away from that. We've got to flee that. Sure.
And avoiding also has to do with things that, like as far as things that will, in this case, generate strife.
Right.
Like as far as there are things that are sinful in others, that, yeah, as you said, that may not lead us into sin, but we've got to put a stop to that in others. Whereas youthful lusts, we're not going to be able to put a stop to someone else, what someone else is doing necessarily. We've got to flee from them so that they don't affect us, because there's a lot of things in youth that you can be tempted to do, everyone else is doing, and you got to get away from them because they're much stronger temptation.
Right, right. As we thought of lust, primarily we kind of set that with sexual desires, but I think that's a mistake to think that way in every case. Paul here is writing to a young man, and a young man that, of all that we have read about him, he's faithful. Timothy's been raised in a faithful family. So we need to remember that lust can include other things, not just sexual. Things like food and drink, pleasures, ambitions, material possessions, patience. I thought of Timothy being in Ephesus. Ephesus was a modern city. It was a city of wealth and all kinds of idolatry. And a young man being surrounded by that and beginning to take upon himself the duties of an evangelist, there's a lot he needs to watch out for.
Gossip, controlling your tongue. There's a lot of things a preacher knows that other people may not know.
Right.
And I've always got to be careful. Okay, what is it that people have to know, and what are the things that people do not have to know? And learning to control your tongue is something youth don't do. Like, you see kids, they'll just blurt out whatever,
right,
whatever comes into their mind. We can do a lot of damage if we say the wrong thing, or if we say something we should not have said because it was not ours to tell.
Right.
And we can cause people not to be Christians by our tongue if we're not careful. And so I would include that in learning to control your tongue.
Yes.
Within Paul's love, joy, peace. Like, as far as peace, you're going to ruin it if you can't control your tongue.
Right, right. A word spoken can't be taken back sometimes. I think we look into that thought a little later on, but just your thought earlier about avoiding foolish and ignorant disputes. We mustn't quarrel. We mustn't have the attitude to quarrel. We need to be gentle, as Jeremy said, but able to teach. But to teach, every teacher I've talked to, if you don't have patience, then you're never going to be a good teacher. You've got to have patience and show humbleness as you try and correct and teach. Carla?
I don't know if you remember Bill Clint from
Oh, yes.
Avenue. So his wife, when I first came to Canada and so on, and then she said, when people come complaining to you about somebody else, just nip it in the bud and say, this is between you and them. I do not want to hear it. Unless you've tried to do that, and there is a problem, then we could pursue this. So he has to learn to avoid everybody coming and complaining, making complaints that really they didn't do their due diligence by fixing the problem. What does the Bible say? You go to the person, you try to fix it, and then if it is not, you cannot do it, then you come and tell somebody else. And then if that doesn't work, you tell it to church. So you got to be careful with all, these other things too. So it's just listening to people complaining and arguing and so on. Well, that's going to take up a lot of his time too. He doesn't need to know all these things going on between you and somebody else,
Right.
right?
And that comes through experience too, doesn't it? Just thinking of what Jeremy just said, and I think that comes up again, but when we're teaching a new convert, you can say things to them that may turn them right off because of your attitude, because of how you present God's word to them. You may discourage them. And I'm not saying that we need to hide the truth or tell them something that maybe they'd like to hear. No, we can't do that. I've heard of preachers, one, for instance, and he said when he spoke to a couple that were living in adultery, he started crying because he said that I had to let these two people know this is what this is God's law. And as much as it hurts, he realized that they have a soul, and at that particular moment, their souls were in his hand for direction. So, how he handled that, to me was a good way. He let them know. He didn't, turn them against him. He just plainly told them. Sure.
As part of being able to teach, oftentimes we think, okay, apt to teach means you have to have knowledge, or you have to be a good speaker. No, you have to learn how to, in different situations, teach the truth.
Right.
Because what may work for you, if I was studying with you, if you weren't a Christian, I was studying with you, and I've developed a relationship with you, I learned how I can speak to you, what's going to get you to be convicted. Whereas if I go to Gord, if Gord wasn't a Christian, and I was teaching him, and I taught the same way, I might get two completely different reactions.
Yes.
Because from the same message, over no fault than just the way I presented it. Sometimes you'll get the same reaction because people either reject or accept God's word, but being able to teach requires you to have the ability to present the truth in a way that is understandable and is useful to the person you're teaching.
Right. And it demands humbleness, doesn't it? I always think to myself, need to remind myself that at one point in my life I was living the same way. And so I need to understand that as I present things to them. And I need to let that person know. We are not sinless people. We fall short. But we desire to change our lives. And so whoever you're studying with needs to know that. And that will kind of open up their heart to listening to you, because you're not presenting yourself in a proud manner like, if you can ever become like me, you might be lucky. No, we can't be like that. So, no other thoughts. We'll move on then to question 5. And how does Paul instruct Timothy to deal with those who persist in error in the following passages? And some of these now we've kind of touched on, but we'll just pass through them quickly if there's no comments. But 2 Timothy 2 and verses 16 to 18. So we finished with Veronica.
No, you didn't get Veronica. She didn't read.
Oh, I didn't get Veronica. Sorry, right. Can you read them, Veronica?
But shall your faith and evil habit, they will increase to more godliness and
Okay, thank you. There's a contrast here in these passages, and it's between what is showing approval to God and handling His truth, and profane and vain babblings. What does that bring to your mind? What can religious discussions sometimes end up in?
Yelling.
It-
Yelling, dispute,
Right,
division.
right. Division, yelling. They can easily fall into this category of profane, vain babblings.
And it's at the end it causes conflict.
Right, James, yeah. Conflict is the end result, isn't it? Which is useless, doesn't it? It destroys the whole purpose. And I think there must have been, when we think of Paul here, there must have been some at Ephesus who argued about matters that didn't matter. And opinions, yeah. And we can fall into that trap. And I read one commentator, his line was, time and truth are too precious to waste. And I thought about that, and yeah, that's true. We need to look deeply into what we're discussing with. I've known over the course of my time, sometimes with another denominational person, the discussion can jump from here to there to there. And, I remember one time, it was with the help of Tammy, and she said to me, well, like, the question you asked, that's long gone. And I went, oh yeah, right. Because you allow yourself, then you start defending every time they go somewhere. You try and defend that. And that gets nowhere, doesn't it? Nothing is accomplished. And it also reminds me that evil babblings, if that's what we want to call it, it only leads to more ungodliness, doesn't it? Because it'll become a fight, is what it is.
And the verse that comes right before that is rightly handling the word of truth. When you rightly handle the word of truth, you understand the difference between idle babblings and truth. Hymenaeus and Philetus, they were straying from the truth by teaching the resurrection was already past. Well, what they were saying was idle babblings, but that needed, and they shouldn't have been engaging in those things. But their doctrine was spreading like cancer, and so Timothy needed to rightly handle the word of truth, teach that,
right,
and get other people to stop just idle chatter and useless talking that's going to do no good.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And sometimes, situations I've seen, if you had a Diotrephes or in your membership, there are times then when you need to call, the elders need to take that person aside, because you can't allow it to become a battle in study, because you're not building a spirit of reverence to God in anybody's heart, because people are becoming agitated from listening to this. It needs to be handled respectfully. And that can be a challenge, but we need to do that. We need to have that attitude as Christians, don't we?
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to